Hi, it's Calvin Niles, the mindful storyteller, and I am delighted to share with you stories of awakening. Each week, I'm going to be talking to people from around the world of various backgrounds and experiences. People I love, I know, and people I admire, but also those who are completely new to me. One thing all my guests will have in common is that they have been through a journey of awakening. By awakening, I mean a call to higher consciousness and deeper self-awareness beyond material reality. These stories will be real, challenging, funny, stimulating, and insightful. We're going to take our good time with these conversations. So listen from your comfy chair with your favorite drink, or on your weekend stroll, your morning routine, or whatever makes you happy. Stories of Awakening with me, Calvin Niles, and I look forward to you tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Stories of Awakening, and I am so happy to actually have somebody who I've talked about, mentioned in some of my interviews in the past, someone very instrumental and big part of my own spiritual journey, and that's my mother, Leonora, who obviously I don't call Leonora normally, but is a spiritual teacher, a nurse, a health worker, and my mum. So, mum, thanks for coming on and talking about your journey. And I know I'm going to be surprised by some of the things that you have to say. So I'm really glad that you made the time to come. How are you doing, and how is Trinidad treating you at the moment?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm doing just fine. And Trinidad is treating me just fine as well. Because one, it's home. Two, I like the weather. And three, it is the spirit of Trinidad, the spirit I was born into. So that makes all the difference.
Yeah, I remember spending a lot of time growing up visiting Trinidad, even though I never lived there full time. So obviously it's like a second home. So I don't even know where we're going to start here, but maybe let's just leave it open. And I just wonder if you could tell us how your own spiritual awakening started. So this series is all about people's awakening journey. And I would love to know where yours actually started.
Well, to quote Buddha, who just said, there are two great moments in a person's life: the day they were born and the day they discovered why. So I think my journey started the day I was born. I remember very early in my life, maybe 3 years, 4 years. I don't remember details, but I most certainly remember a lot of my early life and my early childhood. And one of the great moments, or I should say, one of the most startling moments for me is, for a long time, I thought that I lived in the center of the earth and that the sky was the ceiling. I suddenly discovered by somebody either talking about it, or I don't remember exactly what triggered it, that we were living on the surface of the earth. I was startled to think that we were walking on this big globe, unprotected, I thought at the time, just open and in space. So that, to me, was one of the big moments. So then I became aware of that. So my whole life was being unaware of things and then being aware.
Yeah.
As things came into my life and I became more aware, I began to change lifestyles and put things into practice. So I am now on an awakening journey.
Yeah. 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 So it's kind of like these continually happening events which cause you to become gradually more and more aware, more and more aware as you sort of developed. Where did you have like a really big moment, which was like a huge bang, you know, that really fundamentally changed your perspective of reality, you know? Because I know obviously, you know, you had a lot of siblings growing up, and there's a lot of changes in you from where you were compared to say my aunts and my uncle. You were very different, and I just wonder if that had anything to do with some of these experiences that you had. Obviously everybody's individual, but was there kind of like a big moment maybe that caused your awakening to accelerate at any phase?
Um, I am not sure if it actually stimulated the awakening, but I had one big moment when I was 8. I had heard of people dying in the village, so death was not unusual to hear of. But at 8, my father suddenly became ill, and within 2 days, he was gone. And that moment in my life, I think, shaped almost everything, all the steps I made after that on my journey, I think made a difference because I did not have a father in my life, because I did not fully understand what happened. But at the same time, it triggered something within me that I was even beyond me, that I didn't quite understand. I now realize that it was an awakening because I woke up not only to not having a father anymore, but to what death really was. My father was no longer there. I couldn't touch him. I couldn't see him. I couldn't feel his presence. But then that changed.
Hi, if you're enjoying this conversation, you might like SOAR Book Club. Many similar conversations are happening in SOAR Book Club, a book club for the spiritually curious. If you like spiritual books and community, then why not join SOAR, where we can grow together, learn together in a fun and nurturing environment. Click the link below in the description to find out more about SOAR Book Club or to find out how you can join. It'd be nice to see you there.
Because at some point after that, I began to feel his presence, even though I didn't fully understand it. I know a lot of the older family members would say, oh, she's just psychologically disturbed. But I knew when I felt his presence. I might have been psychologically disturbed. I'm not dismissing that. But it served its purpose because it has put me on a different journey, I think, than what I thought I would have.
Yeah. And how did that sort of happen? How did you feel his presence, or how did you become aware of a sort of a non-physical entity around you at that time? Was that, I mean, I appreciate you might not have used that language,
Yes.
but how did that appear? How did it show up?
Well, I would have dreams of him, and I would wake up and I would feel a warmth and a presence. And that to me said he was around. At that age, couldn't fully understand it, but I always felt he was always around. But most of it was stimulated by dreams. And I would dream of him regularly, and especially if I felt sad at different moments. If I'm happy, I felt he was around. If I was sad, I felt he was there supporting me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just a feeling.
Mm.
And I think even now, I am still aware of a presence.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people talk about feelings being such an important part of, and that's what I'm learning in these conversations. A lot of people talk about feelings being, you can't explain everything sufficiently because so much of it is rooted in feeling, as an indicator of, where they rose to higher consciousness. So you're going through this journey. What happened after that? I mean, you became a teenager, of course. Can you remember the next big moment for you when your awareness kind of jumped a notch?
Yes, I think that happened in my teen years. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I felt certain sensations that triggered seizures, and I wasn't aware of what was happening. So many things were happening that I couldn't. It's like a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
I was aware of things, but I didn't know. It's only as I developed later, I discovered that these were triggered by a lot of the energy I was feeling at that time, a lot of the awareness that was deep in my body, maybe, or in all the feelings. And on a conscious level, I wasn't coping. So I think because I was never ever diagnosed an epileptic and I never had seizures outside of certain times. So if I had a challenge and I wasn't coping, I tend to have a seizure.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted 7 years almost to date when it started.
Wow.
So
This is when you were, so they started when you were in your teens, did they?
17.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When I was 17, it started, and when it was 24, it just disappeared. But I never had medication for it. I just upped my vitamins because I remember my mom taking me to a Chinese doctor and telling me to make sure I take my vitamins, especially my vitamin B. So I used to have a lot of that, and it always helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. And those seizures, you think at the time, what was happening? Do you have a kind of reflective? I know, appreciate at the time while you were living through it, you maybe, like you say, that weren't fully conscious. But as you reflect on that, what was happening and what changed for you after that?
What changed after me for that is a certain awareness of my spirituality, because I grew up in the Church of England and I've always been a Christian, but there were some things that I had, some of the Christ principles, I would say now, that I held on to. For example, in Sunday school, I was always taught that the kingdom of heaven was within me, and I could not, for the life of me, understand what that meant. But in my later teen years, I found that I began on a spiritual journey to find out, what does this kingdom of heaven within me mean? And it's that triggered this journey.
Yeah.
I said, I am going to find out.
Yeah.
Because
Was that question, what does the kingdom of heaven within me mean? Was that triggered by the seizures? Or did you start to ask some of these deeper questions during this time of having these seizures?
yes,
Or right.
Yeah, it was during the time of having those seizures that I asked myself a lot of questions. And of course, at that time, you're getting into physical relationships and intimacy and all that. So it triggered a whole cascade of questions. Some of them answers came and some of them took a little longer to come. But I was always curious. What does all of this mean to me? And this curiosity then led me to, the synchronicities, books, groups, individuals who can share their experience. And then, as they say, the light bulbs started to go off. And I think it was around that time that my spiritual journey really began in serious, because I never stopped seeking after that.
Yeah. So your first question was, what does this mean? The kingdom of heaven is within. Yes. The seizures caused you to ask some bigger questions about why, yes. Basically.
That's right.
And then you started to investigate books, right. Groups, and different people. So where did that take you after? Well, were you in your 20s or 30s by this time? I guess you were in your 20s.
In my 20s, but I had began my nursing career, and I was seeing things in a whole new light. For example, I know that when we talked about the kingdom of heaven, it was not a physical thing. But during the nursing career, I was able to look at the body. I was able to look at conception and how the body was created. And I'm thinking, one moment of intimacy, and then a sperm and an egg came together. You carried it for 9 months, and all of a sudden, this new baby arrives. So I'm thinking, who created that in the womb? When it comes out, I said, it's my baby. I claimed it, of course, because the ego loves to claim everything. So I claimed it, it's my baby. But was I able to create a human body in the womb with all these different organs and all these different systems, and all these systems operating independently but yet depend on each other, and creating a balance in the body? So all those things I started looking at and trying to relate it to the spiritual aspect. And I think it was at that time that this kingdom of heaven made a difference. It said to me that God is inside this little baby because I didn't do it. God is inside. And it is that awareness that made me think, now I know the kingdom of heaven, because God planted himself in this little body, created it with his own hands in the womb, and sent it into the world. And it made me feel better about myself, because I began to feel the presence. And I said, that's God's spirit that's within me. It was not just a baby. So I saw it for myself. And then when I had my own children, I saw it in them. But by that time, obviously, I had learned a whole lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're doing this nursing and you're asking these questions, and they're causing more questions too, and you're investigating and learning. So this thing of birth just was so miraculous. You thought was no way that I'm responsible for this, even though everybody says my child, my baby.
That's right. I felt that even though I carried it, I carried it for God, because it was God's gift. That's how I began to see it. And that's how I began to feel it. Yeah. That it is God's gift to me. So I felt privileged to be able to have this godchild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're now pretty much, I guess you're deep into your nursing career at this time. And obviously I would know that part very well. Um, having seen you go to work every day in your nursing uniform. But of course, a lot of that started long before I was even born. So, how did the nursing feature for you in helping those ripples of awakening? Was it this, these more questions of the miraculous nature of life and so on was obviously happening. Did anything else happen along that journey, or did something else in your outside life take place to then even propel you further? And also another question, really, I will always wondered this is that, as you're starting to gradually, you mentioned, you say you're gradually waking up, were there any times where you felt you've fallen back to sleep, so to speak?
Of course, many times. And I think because I started on this spiritual journey, I sometimes had to bring myself back down to earth and recognize my humanness. So very often I would come back or go to sleep, as you would call it, go back to sleep and wonder, what is this all about? Because you are in relationships now and you're going through all the stuff that goes on, as you know, in relationships, the ups, the downs, the pain, the joy, and going through all those things at that time took you on an emotional roller coaster. Of course, I grew up with a lot of women in my household because I was the last of 6 and there were 5 girls and 1 boy. Then my aunt came to live with us and she had a daughter. So it was matriarchal. Everything around me was about women. I saw divorced. I saw, of course, my mom first, widowed. Then my aunt divorced. Then I saw my older siblings, my sisters, in relationships, and I saw all the pain and the crying and the back and the forth. I had one sister who became pregnant at 19 and was so horrified because in those days you were not supposed to get married, have children out of wedlock. So she was traumatized by that. She ended up giving birth to a son, but died 3 months later with meningitis. So when she died, she was 21. So I'm dealing with all these things, death of my sister. I'm still overcoming death because they were all very close. My father's death. Then my aunt died the following year. Then 6 months later, my sister died. So I was dealing with all that stuff. And those things, emotional roller coasters, just get buried into your cells. It's only now I'm recognizing that because of awakening. So during the time, all those things were buried in my body, but I didn't know. But as I grew, and as I say grew, I'm still growing, I got more and more a greater awareness and a greater understanding of what was happening. And when I lived in New York, I was exposed to 2 teachings. I was trained in transactional analysis and also the Course in Miracles. The transactional analysis was, an eye-opener. It was an awakening. It was everything tied into one because it made me understand myself for the first time. As Eric Byrne says in his book, everyone has three ego states: a parent ego state, a child ego state, and an adult ego state. And learning that and helping me to recognize the transactions that I made on a regular basis with the people around me, the people I worked with, and so on, determined where I was coming from. So he says the adult ego state is the one that is taught, where you learn from your parents and significant adults. The child ego state was that creative aspect of me, but the hurt child, all the pain of my father's death and losing my sister and so on. And then the adult ego state, which I'm working on more and more, is the one that is thought, THOUGHT. So I was beginning to think for myself now, not what I was taught when I was young, and not from the old pain necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I was beginning to think for myself and examine.
So you're starting to see basically your conditioning, become conscious of your own conditioning. And I noticed you jumped into your experience in New York there and some of the training you underwent. So what was it that called you to that training? Would you say that you did something else happen and then you went, I need to do this training, that made you take that step towards a training? Did it just spontaneously seem to appear? Or, what was it about your life that was happening that kept calling you to do some of these things?
Okay. I think the first thing is I sort of moved away from the traditional religion and opened up myself a little more to the metaphysical aspect of things. When I did that, I think everything began to align itself. A lot of it, I cannot say I did, because I just followed what I was guided to do. So when I was in New York, I belonged to the Unity Center, which is Unity School of Christianity, and they did their affirmations and the reprogramming through affirmations and so on. And having done these courses while I was there and going on retreats to Kansas City, I wanted to do the Unity ministry, and I was set on it. My husband at the time, as you know, retired, was a diplomat, and he was at the consulate in New York. And just as I was getting ready to go and do the ministry, he was told that we were leaving and going to Barbados. For a long time, I objected and kicked up and carried on and did all the dances we do when we want to do what we want to do without asking God what he wanted us to do. And I learned how important it is to remain anchored in the divine and ask God first and then make the steps, because I went through a lot of agony. How dare they send him home now? This is when I want to do God's work, and so on and so forth. So I went through a lot of emotional upheaval. And then one day on my way to work, I was on the subway, and the little voice that every now and then reminds you that, hey, you got to remember who's in charge. I heard that little voice say, so you say you want to do my work, and you are determining where you want to do it and how. And another light bulb moment. Mm-hmm. And I just totally surrendered and went to Barbados, but continued this feeling, deep feeling of wanting to do God's work, and however he wanted me to do it. And a few weeks after I got to Barbados, talking to a few of my friends and so, I said, they asked me, why don't you have a group and let's have some discussions? You have some things to offer. And I'm thinking, a little scary that.
Mm-hmm.
But I was never afraid of scary. I was scared, but never afraid of scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, why not? And 3 weeks later, after getting to Barbados, a group of 6 came to our house and we started this group, metaphysical group, where we discussed stuff. Then a friend of, well, I don't think he was a friend at the time. We didn't know each other, but my husband and this guy had the 2 Volvos, the only 2 Volvos in Barbados at the time. And someone referred him to Calvin because he couldn't find his manual and the car needed some work. And Dennis came into our lives at that time because he came to borrow a manual. And of course, I'm all excited about all this metaphysical stuff I'm into and how great I'm feeling and how wonderful this life is and so on. And he just kept looking at me. And I discovered he had belonged to a group in New York, a metaphysical group. And then he said, can I come to the group meeting? I said, of course, every Friday night at 7, whatever. And that's how that started. And then we came together and started doing a lot of work together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So by this time, you were already aware that, there was that you start, it sounds like you already had this awareness that, okay, I need to remember that I'm not fully 100% in charge here. There's a greater power at work, sort of, because you said earlier that you were guided towards some of these groups and so on. When did you become aware that you were being guided? When did you become aware that you were not the one making decisions, that you were not the one choosing to go here, there, and wherever? Do you remember that time or that moment where you realized, I'm not the one deciding this? There's something else deciding this. Do you remember when you for the first time ever, became aware of a higher guidance?
When I was in my early 20s, I would say. And it's because I was making decisions and they weren't happening. I wanted this, I wanted to do that, but it was not happening the way I wanted it. And it suddenly dawned on me that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about what you want. It is what God wants for you. And I think that started around 1920, 19 years or 20 years. And letting go, surrendering, and saying, okay, God, you guide me. And the day I said that, I realized that's how your life ought to be. God, you guide me. And I have done that all the rest of my life. Made decisions that I probably would not have made if I had operated just from head and not from heart. So that taught me to listen to my heart. Because listening to my head, boy, did I trip over those clay feet. But when I listen to my heart, I can feel the difference. The information I received then just felt good. And not only that, I made a decision anchored in the divine, and everything was aligned. I didn't have to do much. So that taught me then, you listen to God first, let Him guide you, and let Him take you where He wants you, not where you want to go. And that's when I dropped the word disappointment from my vocabulary. Because I'm thinking I'm only disappointed if it's an ego stuff, if it's an ego thing. But if I remain anchored in the divine, I only have one appointment, and that is with God. So there can be no disappointments.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really powerful stuff. And I guess because you were already raised in the church, you already were using words like God and divine and things like that. Is that right? Were you already saying
That's
things
correct.
like that? And then,
Yes.
so for you, realizing that there was a higher power, you were taught there was a higher power, but then you started to realize it for yourself, experience it for yourself after you've been through these you had these seizures, and then you were in your 20s trying to make all these things happen that weren't happening, and then there was a kind of spontaneous surrendering, or was it something particular that you were just really banging your head against a brick wall with, or was it more of a just like a spontaneous surrendering and saying, all right, God, you kind of dictate my next moves?
Yes, I think it was a spontaneous surrendering, because after all the different experiences and just observing how God guided my life, I had to surrender, because it was not about me anymore. It was about what God wants for me. And as I said, learning all the things that I did through the different courses, the Course in Miracles, and of course, my Bible is my guide, and the Master Jesus is my master. So I read my Bible. I don't understand all of it, but there are a lot of stories in it that I love, because it tells me about me. And to me, that's when the awakening happens for me, even now.
Mm-hmm.
I hear things, then I become aware of it. So I went from unaware to being aware. And over the years, I changed my lifestyle. And I changed my lifestyle because my senses were being more acute. So I was no longer just hearing, I was listening. I was no longer just seeing, I was observing. I would look at things and see them from a deeper level. And all my other senses, like my sense of taste, the things I used to eat before no longer served me.
Mm-hmm.
So my
Mm-hmm.
palate changed. So all my senses became a little more acute. And the more acute they became, is the more I was able to surrender and allow the divine to guide me, because it became real to me then. So it was experiences that made me real and recognize that, you're God's miracle. You're God's walking miracle. He created you. He made all, and the trillions of cells in my body began to dance.
Yeah, and these experiences are some of those things we already heard, right? We then including the experience with the nursing and watching childbirth and going through all that. So you've gone through this space of some spontaneous sort of up leveling in your awareness, and then some of them were just through sheer pain and challenge through dealing with the death and the seizures and so on. What happened after that? What big moments happened for you after that on your awakening journey? Once you did your ordination, you moved country, you resisted that for a long time, but then of course you met who I know as Uncle Dennis. um so what big things happened for you after that? Were there any kind of huge moments that you say continue to happen, or were there more like small ripples of awakening that happened after that?
Well, there were small ripples and there were big storms. So the ripples just came as a result of my changing the way I thought. It just changed the way I changed my lifestyle, giving up things that no longer serve me. So those were the ripples. But then the big moments came when I had to make decisions about relationships that I just had to have courage to make decisions around them. And when I made those decisions, I felt free.
Mm-hmm.
I felt different. I felt, yeah. And I thought, when the leaf falls off the tree in the autumn, we don't go trying to put it back on the tree. We just allow the seasons to happen. And then the spring comes and I have new leaves. And those are the things that continue to give me strength on the journey. And knowing that I'm not alone and feeling my cells in my body come alive. Because everything that happened in my life from my childhood until now, just buried in my cells, but I didn't realize how much of it and how much work is needed to bring those cells back, to regenerate those cells, bring them to life. And could you imagine when those trillions of cells in my body, I'm not there yet, working on it, when the trillions of cells in my body begin to vibrate at such a high level, I'm aiming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's when we get our masters. They have overcome the body. They have regenerated the physical body to a level where it's just light.
Yeah.
And I think that's when we talk about the enlightened.
Yeah. When you hear this guide, or when you're guided or told to go somewhere and do something, as you mentioned, how does that appear to you? Does it appear as a voice? Does it appear as, I don't know, a song, a sign? How do you know when you're being guided to do something? And then how do you know whether that's right?
Okay. For me, it's a knowing. It's simple things. I leave home, I do take my breaths, and I walk. I'm going somewhere, but there's something that says, but as I'm walking, I'm thinking, with every breath and every step I take, God is with me. So that's my little mantra. With every breath I take and every step I make, God is with me. And then I missed the bus that I was supposed to get, or something else happens. And I said, okay, I don't feel at all concerned about the change in circumstances, because then there's a knowing. I feel it. Yep, I wasn't supposed to get that bus. And then maybe I take the next bus and see the first bus that I missed broken down. And we passed it. And I said, thank you, Lord. Thank you for guiding me. Thank you. Thank you for showing me that you are in charge. So those little ripples in my everyday life are the ones that trigger the bigger things. So when you get the little knowings in the ripples, when the storm comes, there's also a knowing. And of course, by which time I realized that what I may call a storm is just God saying, wake up, we're ready to take you to another level. Wake up.
Yeah.
So I'm not battling with the storms. I'm just allowing myself to move around and be changed and molded
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And actually, I forgot about the seizures. I know I
Mm.
somehow remember you mentioning having seizures when you were young, but it kind of makes more sense now how that has contributed to, I guess, whatever kind of journey you were going through at the time has contributed to your asking those deeper questions. And that's something a lot of people have been saying on this series about, whether it was a health crisis or whether it was, like you said, relational crisis and so on. So what next now? I mean, I know you're coming up to your 80th year, and even though you look 20 years younger, so that bodes well for people like me. um, what's next for you, and what's the next steps?
Okay. I'm not sure yet, but because I know God has a plan for me, when it's revealed, I most certainly would let you know. You'll be one of the first to know. But
Amazing,
there
amazing.
is a plan. But I'm looking at the changes in the world and looking at the amount of people in the world that need support. And I know that something, because I'm an empath by nature, and I know that there's some work for me to do in assisting the less fortunate. Whether I like you or I don't like you is irrelevant. But I love you because we are all one. Whether you're black, white, red, orange, green, there's only one race in my mind, and that's the human race.
What is most meaningful for you in 2022? Is it healing and forgiveness? Is it love and belonging? Or maybe it's the courage to be and to act. SOAR Book Club has all of this for you. If you want to read more and need accountability to keep you moving forward in your already busy life, are you looking for inspiration to develop your spiritual awareness? Maybe you want to be part of a positive community during these uncertain times, or connect with like-minded people who love stories and books. Then join SOAR Book Club. Hop on board. The train is about to leave the station, and I would love to have you on the journey with me. So click the link below to join. That's SOAR Book Club with me, Calvin Niles. I hope to see you there.